I always find it interesting to learn which games were released at the end of a console's lifespan, so I thought it would be a good idea to start with the NES. The Super Nintendo came out in 1991, but they were still releasing games for the NES well into 1994. Now just to be clear, we're only talking about the last NES games to be released in North America, so no PAL or Famicom games will be mentioned. For example, I know The Lion King on NES came out in 1994, but I'm not going to talk about it because it wasn't released in North America. There's also Sunday Funday from Wisdom Tree that was released in 1995, but since that is unlicensed, I'm not talking about that either. I'm also aware that there have been re-releases over the years, like with Metal Storm and Battletoads, but I'm only talking about games that were released during the console's lifespan. So all that being said, let's talk about the last 5 NES games that are licensed that were released in North America. Mario's Time Machine was actually first released for the Super Nintendo in 1993, but later in June 1994 it was released on the NES. It's an educational game from hell. The game's plot is that Bowser has created a time machine to steal historical artifacts to put in his museum. And it's up to you, Mario, to put them back in their proper time zones. But that's not enough. Bowser has also kidnapped Yoshi, but that doesn't come into play until the end of the game. The game was developed by Software Toolworks, who is most commonly known for their Mavis Beacon Teaches Typing series. So this was not made by Nintendo, which quickly becomes obvious. The most interesting thing about this game is the fact that the sprites look a lot like the sprites from Super Mario World, despite it being an NES game. It's also weird seeing Yoshi like this in an NES game. After entering Bowser's museum, which features charming little portraits, you pick a door and go inside. This brings you into a version of the original Mario Bros. Arcade game. You hit Koopas until one gives you a random object that represents a period of time. For example, an apple to represent Isaac Newton's law of gravity, or the American flag to represent the moon landing. To pick up the items, you hit down on the D-pad. After getting the item and hopping into the time machine, you must select the correct date in which the object belongs. If you choose incorrectly, you kinda just run around a level until you figure out you're wrong. Once inside a level, information blocks give you facts about the time period you're in. You also have to dodge enemies and navigate through awkwardly placed blocks and items until you get to the end of the level. This game does not have controls that work as well as Super Mario World or Mario 3, so you can't slide under blocks, and it just makes everything a pain to navigate. Almost always, the end of the level is where you need to place your special item by hitting start and select. For example, you place the apple on top of the tree so Newton can have it fall on his head. But sometimes there are time periods where you need to place the item in the middle of the stage, and it's not so obvious. Like in the stage for the year 1905, you have to bring back Einstein's physics equation because Bowser took E = mc squared. You rather quickly see a chalkboard and assume you leave the equation there, but no. There are 2 chalkboards on this level, and they are identical, and you need to place it in front of the second chalkboard. How would you know to do that? And if you do place an item in an incorrect spot, a little bird flies in and takes it away. So you have to go through all the trouble to enter the level again. It's super annoying. And again, when I was in year 1192, I placed the sword on top of the shrine instead of inside of it. So my little bird friend came to take it away. I hate this. Once you bring back all of the artifacts back to their rightful years and locations, you then take a test and proceed to fight Bowser if you get all of the answers right. The Bowser fight is pretty lame. It's only like fighting Boom Boom in Mario 3. You'd expect a more interesting boss pattern for the final boss, but nope. It's the bare minimum effort by the devs. And then you're awarded the key to free Yoshi. After doing all of this, you'd expect some form of elaborate ending, right? Nope, not in Mario's Time Machine. It's simply a screen that says, "You win," with a happy Mario while Bowser cries in the corner. I guess it's fine, but then it keeps jumping back and forth between a credits screen that just makes the ending really lackluster. A lackluster ending for a lackluster game. In August 1994, Taito released the Flintstones Surprise at Dinosaur Peak. This is now a pretty widely known game due to it being so rare and expensive. The game is a typical platformer, but you can switch between both Fred and Barney as they each have different abilities. Fred's main weapon is a club to hit enemies, while Barney uses a slingshot which offers a wider range of attack. Barney can also hang off of poles while Fred cannot. But Fred does get an ability to throw hammers at some point. There's some quirky elements to this game, like climbing up onto platforms, which can take a bit of getting used to. To do this, you hold A and hit up on the D-pad. And instead of ducking, you hide your head in your shirt, which is pretty funny. What is he, a Ninja Turtle? When I got to a boss fight, I realized that Fred can charge up his attack with the club, which is pretty cool. On the second boss, which is a giant caveman, I realized that here is a good place to use Barney and his slingshot because he gives you some distance. So the game does a nice job of giving you a reason to switch between Barney and Fred. One of my favorite things about this game is that the overworld map kind of reminds me of Mario 3 in a way. They also give you plenty of health along the way, which definitely helps. I think if this was released in like 1987, it would be considered a classic. But because it was released so late into the NES's lifespan, no one really cared. Remember these commercials?
In a crash, your pumpkin will be nothing but a squash.
These were a line of PSAs from the late 80s to educate people about how important it is to wear your seatbelt. Well, they were so popular that eventually a toy line came about called the Incredible Crash Test Dummies, and then of course, a video game was released. In 1993, the game was first released for the Super Nintendo, and then in August of 1994, it was ported to the NES. This game is a fast-paced side-scroller that mostly consists of you avoiding obstacles and bouncing from platform to platform. The first stage has you jumping over giant thumbtacks, bouncing wheels, robots, and what I assume to be enemy dummies. You can stun these by spraying a giant can of air at them, which allows you to pass without taking a hit. You're also collecting traffic cones and bouncing on giant tires to propel you to new areas. It's really annoying getting hit by something because when you do, it shoots you backwards until you fly into a wall and explode. You can also sometimes lose your head, which causes the controls to be backwards, so you press right to go left and vice versa. I think if this happens, it lasts until you die, so that really sucks. This happened to me towards the end of the stage and I accidentally fell, causing me to fall all the way back to the beginning of the stage. There's also items like a balloon that allows you to slow down enough to make platforming a bit easier. Overall, the controls aren't terrible, but slippery enough to drive you a bit insane. The Jungle Book was released in August of 1994 from Virgin Games. It's a side-scroller where you're mostly just climbing trees and swinging from vine to vine while dodging angry animals. But I thought Mowgli was supposed to be friends with the animals. The goal of each stage is to collect all the gems. This would be better designed if there was a map, since it's easy to drive yourself crazy running around these levels. As for weapons, the game starts you off with a banana projectile that can shoot straight, upwards, and diagonally. Eventually you get other items, like a boomerang and the ability to throw 2 bananas at once. You can cycle through these abilities by pressing select. The controls feel a bit slippery since unless you're running the whole time, you have to walk very, very slowly, which drives me insane. The momentum-based running makes you have to go really slowly up hills. This makes the whole experience feel a bit sluggish and slow. Sometimes it can be super annoying jumping from vine to vine. You have to aim for the lower half of the vine when jumping or else he won't grab onto it. Another thing that's really annoying is you can't grab an item unless you're standing on the same platform as the item itself, no matter how much you're totally touching it. But for some positives, the animation of Mowgli climbing the ropes is pretty good, and when you hit an enemy, they turn into grapes, which gives you health. So it's not like it's a one-hit death or anything. After completing the first stage, you get a bonus stage where you can collect fruit and items like thyme and boomerangs. Because of the controls, it's kind of hard to jump around. Did I mention that the controls are bad yet? The second stage is more of the first, but this time there are elevators in the trees. The second I started this level though, I fell to my death, since now the ground beneath you crumbles in some places. Wonderful. But, much like the first stage, it's nothing but a bunch of leap of faith jumps. You'd be better off watching Tailspin if you need Jungle Book characters in your life. And finally, the last game developed by Nintendo for the NES was Wario's Woods. It's a puzzle game where you play as Toad. You might be thinking, but I thought this was a Wario game. Well, after a while, Wario comes into frame in the top right. He adds more monsters to the screen, making things more difficult. He also appears in cutscenes, and you can fight him as a boss in Mode B. For some reason, he's dressed in purple like Waluigi instead of his familiar yellow outfit. Anyway, let's talk about gameplay. The goal is to have Toad clear out the monsters on each stage to progress to the next screen. There has to be at least 3 objects of the same color for an explosion to go off to clear a line. B picks up 1, A picks up a whole stack. A and down will kick the bomb. Also, hitting down on the D-pad drops stuff under Toad and brings him to the top of the stack. There's a bunch of tactics you will learn, like being able to catch a bomb in the air and more. It takes a bit of getting used to for sure, but if you play the game long enough, eventually it starts to feel natural. Toad can walk up the side of the monsters, kind of like he's Spider-Man or something, and by doing this, he can grab monsters at various heights. As the game goes on, they start adding in more difficult enemy types, like monsters that have to be hit multiple times in order to be cleared off the screen. You collect gold, and if you get enough coins, you get an extra life. So if you wanted to 1 credit clear this game, you want a lot of coins to make it through without having to continue. If you clear a bunch of monsters in a row, often a diamond will appear, which acts like a bomb, but will get you more points. And if you take too long, a thwomp starts to come down from the top of the screen, making the workspace smaller, which makes the situation more intense to finish. There is also a Mode B, which is similar to the regular game, except this has boss battles. I think this mode is a little more interesting because it gives you something new to wait for. You'll be eager to see what the next boss encounter will be. This game was also released on the Super Nintendo. The SNES controller has more buttons, so some might find the controls slightly easier with that game. But it's essentially the same thing. Out of all these later NES games, Wario's Woods far outshines everything else. It's a great puzzle game, and if you give it enough of a chance to learn the controls, you will have a fun time with it, especially Mode B. So those were the last 5 games released in North America for the Nintendo Entertainment System. If you were interested in this topic, I can do this for other consoles in the future. What final games on which systems do you want to hear about next? Let me know in the comments, and thank you so much for watching. See you next time, bye!